From the most trusted names in local news, KDPG Sunday Edition.
Good morning and welcome to the KDPG Sunday Edition. I'm Rick Dayton. Stacey Smith and Ken Rice are off this week. This week also marks 40 years since the nuclear accident that happened at 3 Mile Island, the power plant in Middletown, Pennsylvania near Harrisburg, the partial meltdown that released a small amount of radiation that affected nearby areas. But for 7 long days, fear spread much farther.
The primary and overriding concern for all of us is the health and the safety of the people of this entire area.
What happened at 3 Mile Island was so serious, so scary, that the President of the United States came to try to calm things down. A movie that happened to be in theaters at the time was part of the problem.
They're here.
The China Syndrome, a fictional story of a power plant accident that threatens a nuclear holocaust.
The plot almost reads along the same lines as the updates we've been getting from Harrisburg all day and into the night.
At 3 Mile Island, a cooling problem led to real concerns of a core meltdown. Governor Dick Thornburg issued an advisory for pregnant women and little kids
to leave the area within a 5-mile radius of the 3 Mile Island facility until further notice.
Evacuees gathered at an arena in Hershey.
Sooner be here than down there, getting sick in a couple of years from now, maybe.
Even as the chocolate company temporarily stopped using milk from local cows in Hershey bars. With a massive core of reporters asking questions, it seemed there were no good answers.
There's still a great deal of radiation coming out of that reactor, is there not?
Well, I wouldn't say that there's a great deal.
We felt the fear in Pittsburgh. Anti-nuclear demonstrators marched downtown and filled Market Square.
Let us try to find the strength to understand what is being told to us today. That death is as close as our nearest nuclear reactor.
After a tense week, plant operators finally announced they had things under control. Evacuees began returning, tentatively.
Are you still, though, a little bit apprehensive about the situation?
Yeah, we still got our bags packed.
And it will take years before doctors and public health officials amass enough data to determine what the physical and emotional effects have been.
More than half of the people surveyed changed their opinion about whether more nuclear power plants should be constructed.
We feel it's safe, we feel it's clean, and we hope that in time we can answer the questions, the valid questions that are being asked by the public.
Until a lot of questions are answered, the future of nuclear power is clouded by uncertainty. But as the price of oil keeps soaring and future shortages loom, it's clear that the questions about nuclear energy need to be answered soon, so the public can decide whether we can afford to live with or without it.
Ken Rice, KDKA News.
Officials went on to say the risk from the radiation released was inconsequential to public health. Now, years later, 3 Mile Island's current owner plans to shut down the plant's only other reactor. That is scheduled to happen this year. Now, this morning in the KDPG Sunday Edition, we will take a look back in the 1979 3 Mile Island accident in Pennsylvania and how that changed the world's view of nuclear energy and its safety, too. We'll also find out exactly where nuclear power stands right now as a provider of energy and the modifications that have been made to power plants to improve safety. Our guest is Dr. Gregory Reed, professor and director of the Center for Energy, the Grid Institute, and the Electric Power Systems Lab at the University of Pittsburgh Swanson School of Engineering. Joe Smito, the editorial writer for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, joins me for this morning's discussion. Welcome. Glad you're here.
Thank you.
And Greg, thank you for being here. We appreciate it, Doctor.
It's a pleasure, Rick.
As
Joe,
we
nice to be here.
Think back to 3 Mile Island, 40 years ago. Have we figured out what we learned from what happened there?
I think we have. When you look at the safety record and the safety culture and the regulatory environment around nuclear, especially in the United States and most developed nations, we learned a lot. We set a lot of advances in motion around how to be more safe, how to prevent these accidents or incidents from happening, and we haven't had anything here in the U.S. since that time. So I think a lot of lessons were learned, and we exercised a lot of good judgment in putting measures in place to avoid this in the future.
How much has the Nuclear Regulatory Commission changed the safety perception and the safety reality of nuclear?
Well, I think tremendously. Not only the perception, but certainly the reality of it. And again, you look at the track record of nuclear safety in terms of its operation, its reliability, the fact that it's such an important part of our overall energy resource mix. Nuclear accounts for 20% of our total electric power generation in the United States alone. And they've had a lot to do with that.
It seems like, people have adjusted after 3 Mile Island, and you don't hear much in the way of alarm from people who live around those plants around the country today. Is that true?
That's true. That's very true. I think the people who live closest to the plants, a lot of them, benefit from the economic situation of a plant being in their community or in their area, and so they've learned to adapt to living in a community that has a nuclear plant in their backyard. But I think they are certainly very confident in terms of the safety of the plant, and I think that's very true of what happened at 3 Mile Island. I've had students in my class that are from that area that grew up, near the plant and have never had any concerns. So I think there's definitely, from a local community point of view, there's been a very positive response over the decades to what at first happened at 3 Mile Island.
So how much of an issue is there now when it comes to safety? Is it still that the perception is reality for some, that they say, well, look at what happened with Chernobyl,
right.
Look at what happened with 3 Mile Island, that we were that close to having devastating issues? How do we deal with the fact that the numbers suggest one thing, but perception perhaps says something else?
Exactly. I think you make a great point, Rick. It's perception. If you look at the facts and you look at the numbers, first of all, 3 Mile Island, it was not a devastating event as it turned out to be. With relation to health effects, there were many studies done, including from the University of Pittsburgh and the
in
Nuclear
2001 or
Commission.
2, right? I mean,
exactly.
This was done in years and decades later.
Decades later to follow up, no increased incidence of cancers or any other negative impacts from that. Certainly, accidents like Chernobyl and Fukushima have set the industry back in terms of some of that, but I will say that Russia had a very different safety culture than the United States. They did not follow the same policies and procedures, either from engineering or from plant construction and operation, that we do here in the U.S. or that nations like France and Sweden do. And so, the result there was really a lack of a culture in a place like Russia. In Japan, their culture is strong, but again, that was a design flaw more so than an operational or a safety issue with nuclear itself. It was a backup generator that in the United States we would have above the water line, maybe on the top of the building. In Japan, they had it down on the ground. So if you look at the overall operational, again, record of nuclear, and you compare it to other forms of energy, we were talking about it earlier. There's a very good article recently in Forbes magazine on this that lists everything from coal to wind to solar to natural gas, and you see the safety record of plant operations for personnel, and nuclear is by far the most safe in terms of that sense. So I think it is, coming back to the original question, much more perception than reality.
Have people, I know there have been studies documenting that there was no pervasive health effect from the TMI incident. Have people by and large accepted that, though? I mean, every once in a while you hear something about increased cases of thyroid cancer or something like that. Where is the public opinion on that issue?
I think it still comes up, and I still think a lot of the public opinion has questions around it. I think it's also very similar to cancer effects of electromagnetic fields from high voltage transmission lines, which is why those studies were coming out in the 1980s, and it really began decades long that we see today decrease in being able to build transmission lines because the fear of cancer rates around high voltage lines. So the not in my backyard syndrome has entered into that, has made it difficult to build transmission lines. But there again, there's no concrete evidence that there are increased rates of health effects. And so again, I think the question continues to come up, but I think it is, again, not really supported by facts that we're seeing any increase of harm.
So we've touched on the safety issues. On the cost front, nuclear, by many accounts, is not profitable for a lot of these electric companies, at least in the States, the way it is put together right now. Part of the reason why 3 Mile Island, the second reactor, will be shut down based on what they're saying. Right. Why is that? Why is it so expensive? Is it because of the regulatory environment that's there? Is it because of the cost of the materials? Is it because of security? Why is it so expensive?
It's all of those and more. If you go back to the early days of nuclear, nuclear advocates, it was advertised as too cheap to meter at some point, right? Because we would build these plants that were going to last a minimum of 40 years, and now we're even seeing the ability to extend their life to 60 and 80 years. So a resource that was maybe not completely renewable, but certainly very abundant. That once the plant was built, the big expense was in the upfront construction. Lower operating costs than oil and natural gas and coal plants at the time. So nuclear's promise was to be the cheapest form of energy generation there was, and it was for many decades. Today there's a different environment around that, and so part of it is the safety culture. You required more personnel in the plants to operate it. With the regulatory and policy components, there's a lot more check and balances that go into everything you do, from changing a setting on a protective relay in the plant to what you have to go through for shutdown. So certainly over the years, the costs of operating the plants have increased. And when you compare the cost, especially from personnel, to operate a nuclear plant versus a new modern combined cycle gas plant, there's a big difference. And that's really what's happening. If you combine, for example, the low price of natural gas right now as a resource, how inexpensive it is to operate a combined cycle natural gas plant once it's built, compared to the cost of operating an existing nuclear plant, this is what's making nuclear uncompetitive right now.
But it could change if natural gas prices go through the roof, right?
Absolutely, and there's no guarantee that they won't. Natural gas has always been quite volatile in the market, and it's suppressed right now in terms of pricing, but we can't really predict that into the future. And if we start making decisions like Germany recently did, and a knee-jerk reaction to shut down our nuclear fleet, there's a lot of negative consequences of that.
Isn't diversification of sources overall important? I mean, just like you don't put all your money in one investment, right? I mean, you should have a variety of energy sources available.
It's like investing, diversify. And if you look at the diversification right now at the United States, 20% from nuclear, about 35% from natural gas. Coal is certainly declining, but still about 30% from coal, and a strong growth in renewables, which is up over 15% right now.
Hydro and solar, right?
Hydro and solar and wind continues to grow. So we actually have a very strong diversity right now, and we're making gains on carbon emissions reductions, at least in the United States. That's not the case globally. We could talk about that and the importance of keeping nuclear in the mix because it's a carbon emission-free technology. It's a clean energy resource for us. And if we take nuclear out of the equation, we lose a big component of our carbon emission reduction goals. So I think it's critical from that perspective, as well as you said, Joe, that the diversity is very important.
We will talk about the cleanliness of nuclear. We will also talk about some of the security issues as the KDPG Sunday edition continues, as we take another look at some of the challenges these power plants, nuclear and otherwise, face into the 21st century. And that's protection against terrorism. Keep it right here. You're watching the KDPG Sunday edition.